In journalism, there's a phrase, and it's just, who is your audience? Who is your audience? If you're writing to a church member audience, or if maybe you're writing to the leadership of the church, maybe you're writing to someone outside the church, maybe you're writing to a Christian but not an Adventist, maybe you're writing to a Muslim, maybe you're writing to a Buddhist. You have to know who's going to be reading your story or who's going to be watching your video before you do it, because it's going to dramatically change how you do the story. Okay? So once you know who your audience is, once you've determined who it is, and maybe if it's an audience you're not used to writing to, like say a Buddhist audience, maybe you haven't written to a Buddhist audience before, you may want to just kind of write down the traits of a Buddhist belief and how it might affect your story. Because you want to get an idea of how your story is going to go together. And just like we talked about yesterday, for a photograph to be taken, the photograph has to live in the person's mind, and then the person recreates what they're thinking they want the picture to be. They're trying to use the camera to recreate this image they have in their mind. Same thing with, in a sense, with journalism or with writing. You have to have a sense of what you're doing with the writing before you write it out, because otherwise you won't be simple and direct the way Jesus taught us to be. You go over the mountain and through the valley and visit a couple of villages, whatever, and you won't get from point A to point B very easily. And then you suffer because they told you they want 500 words and you've given them 10,000 and you don't know how to make it shorter. Okay, so you need to create, after you know who your audience is, you need to create an angle. And the angle is how you're going to present the story. For example, say in Accra, there's a big series of evangelistic meetings, and God really blessed, and the Spirit really poured it on, and he had 10,000 baptisms. So your story is about these 10,000 baptisms. If you're writing a story to the church members, you would write, of course, how blessed it is to have 10,000 baptisms, how the Spirit really guided and really swayed people's hearts. You talk maybe also about how it was put together. This conference was involved, this division was involved, this church was involved. You may have maybe some little quotes or sound bites. In video, a sound bite is the same as a quote. You may have some quotes from some church members saying how blessed it was to see 10,000 people baptized. So that's a story of 10,000 people being baptized that's for the church. And that's the angle that you took because it's for the church. Now you're going to write the same story for someone outside the church. Well, first you're going to have to explain some things. What's a baptism? Why is it important? Who are Seventh-day Adventists? Why Accra? Those things you don't have to explain to the Adventist audience, but you're going to have to tell the non-Adventist audience, the non-church audience, particularly the non-Christian audience, why it's a good thing that so many people were baptized. You have to bring up, transformation of life issues, because they're going to see it as a ritual, which it is, but they're going to see it only as a ritual, but we're going to see it as a life changed for God, so you're going to have to present that. So your angle changes completely. It's the same story, it'll have the same facts in it, the same general facts in it about the event, but one story is going to go one direction, the other one goes to another direction. Does that make sense? Can you see how the stories are fundamentally different because of the angle? You can have the same facts and have two different stories because the angle is different. Or actually, you can have two stories that are very different but still the same story, just they have different angle. It's very important to understand what the angle is, because you don't want to write a story to church members that ends up in the local newspaper for several reasons. One, they're not going to understand it, but even more importantly, because it's written just for Adventists, the non-Adventists will read it, and they're going to see the Adventist church as some sort of club, a sect or a group that they're not a part of. This group did this. Here we are talking, I'm a member of this group, and this group did this. That's the way they're going to see the story. So they're not going to feel a part of it. They're not going to see it as anything but a bunch of Adventists did something. And if they don't have any knowledge of Adventists or any credibility in the Adventist church, you've not reached anybody. In fact, you may have made it worse, because now you made it look like it's a closed group. Can you see how that would happen? Okay. When you're talking to your family, you talk differently than you talk to your neighbor, and you talk to your neighbor differently than how you talk to somebody on the bus you don't know. Even though you can tell them all the same things, but how you talk to them is different. Is that clear? Okay, that's your angle. We have something that in English, unfortunately, it doesn't work out for the H part, but it's 5 W's and an H in doing a story. It's too bad it's not 6 W's, but it ends up 5 W's and an H. Every story has to contain this, whether it's a video story or a written story, newspaper story, magazine story, a documentary, or a 2-minute video. It always has to have this. This is what made it correct journalism. You need to know who. So in our baptism story, who is who? Who is the who in the baptism story? There's several who's in the story, but who's one of the who's? Yeah, the church. That's one of the who's, because it's the church that did it, so that becomes a who. After that who's another who? The people that got baptized, they're another who. Okay, so, and potentially also, particularly if it's a church written to the church, then they want to know Pastor so-and-so did it, because they might know that pastor. So you want to identify who the who's are. Frequently in a story there'll be a major who, a big who. In this case, the big who, if it's written for the church, is going to be, what's that? Yeah, it's going to be who was baptized. That's the overriding who. You're going to say 10,000 people baptized. What's the next, as an Adventist, what's your next thing? Who are they? Where'd they come from? That's your main who. You have other who's that you also have to mention, but at least when I'm writing a story, it's a matter of opinion, but I'm going to put that's the main who. Who? Baptismal people. What's the what? Yeah, it's what the event was, right? In this case, it's a baptism. Yeah, it's what. You have when. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you just need to explain something. Journalism is about writing history, but it's contemporary history. So you need to write. You need to say when it happened. You said there was a baptism of 10,000 people. Whatever. Never said it happened. What was it? 2 years ago? Was it yesterday? Makes it different in the story. Because if it happened 2 years ago, people are less inclined to want to bother with reading the story or watching the video. But if it happened last night, they're going to be quite interested, particularly as Adventists, they're going to be quite interested in what the story is. Where? Yeah, what the place is. The better story is one that's going to be local to you. So baptism in, for example, if you're, with the church in Ghana, baptism in Ghana is going to be more interesting to the reader than a baptism in Kenya. They both can be interesting, but the more interesting one is the location. When possible, write as local as you can to where you're at. But the where is very important, not only to document it, but because of the interest level of the reader. Why? Why were these people baptized? If you write this to an Adventist group, you really don't have to explain too much about why. You'll have a couple of quotes there about people saying, why they personally were baptized, but the whole idea of why baptize, To an Adventist audience, they already kind of know why. You need to mention it, but they already sort of know why. But to a non-Adventist audience, you may want to spend more time on this to explain why baptism. Why is it important to get your head wet? I take a shower every day, get my head wet. Why is this different? Okay, that's part. You can see how the angle works in. And then how? What's the how of this story? How the event took place? Yeah, it's going to be more about how. You may have other hows. If it's to a non-Adventist audience, you may have a how, as in how is baptism? How are these people found? How did they make the decision? But the big how, the first how, is going to be kind of how it sort of came together. I think in journalism we'll get into this as we go through. Like it starts with the next item. But generally you have the main thing you want to talk about, and then you talk about the details of the main thing. Okay, the inverted pyramid. This is what a journalism story looks like. It starts with an inverted pyramid. How many of you remember studying this in school? The inverted pyramid. And the inverted pyramid means you talk about things general and then become more specific. Then at the end of the story, you're talking very specific, then you come out more general to end it. So at the beginning, you start with something very, very general. So in our baptism story, it would be 10,000 people baptized in Accra. It's pretty general. That pretty much says what happened, and it's in a very general sense. You wouldn't start off with, Mary was baptized by Pastor so-and-so in Ghana. It's too much, it's too specific. It doesn't tell what it is. You have the beginning of the story, which we'll talk about in just a second. It's called a lead. But generally, you want to state the story as quickly as possible, in the most general way possible, at the very beginning, in the first sentence. The person will read that first sentence, and they will decide if they want to read the rest of the story. But if they don't read the rest of the story, they at least know what the story is about, the main details. I mean, not the main detail, the gist of what it was about. Okay, don't be specific off the top. Be very general. A lot of people will talk about, I'll wait, I'll say that with lead. But start general and become more specific. If you're too specific off the top, people aren't interested. They don't know what you're talking about. So even if you're talking to your friend and you're talking about the weather, you'll start general about the weather and you get specific. You say, wow, it really rained last night. There were big raindrops hitting my window. That's inverted pyramid. You wouldn't walk up to your friend and say, water hitting my window last night, storm, big storm. That's this pyramid. You don't say that first because it doesn't make sense what you just said. What you do is you have to say something that's going to explain the next things that you're going to talk about. So, does that make sense? Okay, it's kind of just general communication, but this is the way to go wrong really fast in a story, is not to write inverted pyramid. You should, as a journalist, you should kind of suffer a little bit trying to write the first sentence, because it has to be well written and it has to be to the point, and answering as many of the 5 W's and the H as you can. So, which one's the most important? It depends on your story. It'll change. For example, On our baptism story, 10,000 people baptized. The most important thing is what? What happened? Ted Wilson visits Valley View University. The most important thing is Ted Wilson. It's not that there was a visit, it's that it was Ted Wilson. The visit, so now it's who? Does that make sense? It's going to change, and part of your job as a journalist is to figure out what's the most important part of the story. If you did a story about Ted Wilson, well, you did a story about baptism, then all of your details are going to be about the event. If you do it on Ted Wilson, then your details are going to tend to be around what Ted Wilson did during his visit. You see it's different? The angle is very different. Okay, let's talk about the lead, and then we'll go into iPhone demonstration. The lead is the first sentence in the story, whether it's a video story or a written story. It's the very first sentence. It's the most important sentence. It explains what the story is about, and it sets up the rest of the story. It's written two ways there, lead or lead. Some people write it the second way. My experience is most people write it the first way because it's the first thing in the story, so it leads the story. So the lead has to be general, but specific enough that it explains what the rest of the story is. So that's all you read. You know what the story is. You don't know the details, but you know what happened. You know there was a baptism in Accra, in the stadium, with 10,000 people by the Adventist Church. Those things, I would think just right off the top of my head, I would put those things in the lead. 10,000 people baptized in Accra after large urban event by Seventh-day Adventist Church. Okay, that's lead at make up at the top of my head. If I think about it, I might change it a little bit, but that's the lead. And that I know all the details. Not all the details. I know what the gist of what the story's about that sets up for details. If I'm interested in the baptism, I'll keep reading. If I'm not, I go to something else, but I at least told the viewer the gist of the story, so now they know what happened.
There's something like the caption.
What's that?
Is it the same as the caption of the story?
Well, a caption is a description. So you have like a picture and you put a caption to put context on the picture. So it's a description of what the picture's about.
But the lead, I didn't get it well.
It can be the introduction, the lead. Can it be the introduction?
Yeah, it's the introduction into the story, but it's done in a specific way.
The whole story.
For example, Charles Dickens was a famous British writer, wrote a book called A Tale of Two Cities. It starts off with a famous line. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. Okay, it's a pretty compelling first story. Makes me want to know how could it be good and bad at the same time? So it makes you want to read more of it. But if that was journalism, that's really bad. That's not a good start. The good start should be something like, in the late 18th century, let me do a lead that's reasonable. Let me think about it for just a second. The French Revolution, the revolution in France created chaos in the late 18th century. But London was calm and peaceful. Something like that. If I were to think about it more, I might do something a little better than that one. But that's the general lead. Okay, it's the same. They're saying the same thing, but because it's journalism, you want to be more specific and you want to hit it pretty fast, like from the beginning, what it is you're talking about. Tale of Two Cities is about London and France. So that's what you want to get out there. But being a writer of a novel, he has a different objective, and he wants you to read the rest of it. So he withholds information, and he's going to spend the rest of the book answering the information he didn't give in that one sentence. Does that make sense? The headline, yeah, that's usually, not always. It depends. Some of the stuff we do, we write the story, write the headline, we set up the page where it's going to be printed. We do the whole publication almost, or the video. Videos don't have headlines. The headline is not the lead. The headline is usually written by somebody else because it's hard to write your own headline. It's usually written by somebody else after reading the story, someone who's good at doing headlines. But the headline won't have as much information. It will just say something compelling about the story. Thousands changed their life in Accra. That would be a headline. And then the next thing is, there's a baptism and 10,000 people. Does that make sense? The headline's just a funnel to make them go to the lead, to read the lead. And it's an advertising technique. If you just put in just stories, people don't know what the story's about. They just see lots of words. Anything else you want to talk about lead? If you're a good journalist, you'll suffer over your lead, trying to get it right. And it's not unusual for someone to write the whole story out and then write the lead separately. When I went to journalism school, we used typewriters. We couldn't use the lead. We couldn't do the lead last. We had to do it first. But there are advantages to doing it last, after you've written the story. It's easier to see what the lead is after you've written the story out. But with a lead, it also helps you to focus your writing. All right, let's talk a moment about the iPhone and taking pictures, because we're going to break at 11:30 and take pictures. And I want to make sure we cover this. Okay, how many of you will be using cell phone to take pictures? Okay. How many of those are Apple cell phones? Okay. How many are Android? Okay. All the others are Android. Are there any unusual ones like Windows or anything like that? So they're all Android or the other. Well, Android, every Android phone is a little bit different according to the manufacturer and what version of the Android operating system they're using. But it should be very similar, or at least be able to figure it out from this. On the Apple phones, all the Apple phones are going to be the same, no matter which phone you have, with one exception, that the big phone, if you have the big Apple phone, it has one feature that the smaller ones don't have. The best way to take a picture, an important picture, is to use a device that was created to be a camera and nothing else, like the SLRs and the like. But we all have, almost all of us have, a camera in our pocket, also called a phone, that we can use to take pictures as well. Now, the phone makers, just like the camera makers, they brag about megapixels. Megapixel really isn't the issue. So if you say, well, I have an older phone and it doesn't have as many megapixels, that's not really the issue. The issue is how good the sensor is. Usually with each release of a phone, the sensor is better, irregardless of the number of megapixels. Now here's the screen from the iPhone. The first issue we have in taking pictures with an iPhone is that it's in portrait mode, which is up and down, and most pictures need to be in landscape mode. And I would say all video has to be in landscape mode. Otherwise, you get that. Those are called pillars on each side of the picture where it's black. Those are two black pillars where there's no picture. And if I make it horizontal, you can see it fills the screen. So I don't know if you watch YouTube or something else and they're showing some exciting piece of video, and one it's shot like this, and then it looks like that. It's highly annoying. So the first thing to say about taking pictures with an iPhone is to take it this way, because then you get the picture in the right format. If you do it like this, and you only want to use, say, where the TV monitor is, you have to cut out, you have to crop it, it's called. You have to cut out the TV because there's things there you don't want to see. If you want to see the TV, you don't need to see the doors and all that, so you would crop that out. But then you've lost a lot of the picture. If you do it this way, can you see use more of the picture? Okay, is it clear why you want to hold the phone this way to take a picture? There's also, on these phones where I'm holding it this way, actually this way is up on an iPhone. And I assume probably other phones it's the same way. The volume controls are at the top. If you can shoot it that way, no problem with shooting it that way. Just when you load your pictures, when you dump them out of the camera, load them up, they're all upside down. So I know there are some phones that have the ability to sense which way was up when the picture was taken. But this is considered the right way up with the buttons at the top. Okay? With iPhones, we frequently suffer trying to hold the phone and push this button at the same time. But there's a secret, and that is these buttons take the picture too. So it's just like holding a camera. Okay? One thing about a cell phone is that the camera on the cell phone is designed to make the picture look as good as possible on the phone screen. Doesn't necessarily mean it's going to look very good anywhere else, but it usually looks really good on the screen of your phone because the camera was matched to the screen, so they both look good together. So when you have a choice, use a camera, but there's a convenience in using the phone to take a picture. Just bear in mind when you get back, the pictures are not going to compare to what a camera can do. If you put the same thing on both devices and then check them, they don't look the same. There's several reasons for that. One is this is also a computer and everything else that it has to do. If you notice the difference in size, it's because inside of the camera there's a whole lot more stuff dealing with making good pictures that the phone doesn't have. The biggest difference in the size is the lens. We talked about yesterday, generally, the bigger the lens as far as wide. The wider the lens, the better the lens is. And on a phone, you have this lens. This is that 67 or 72? I think looks like 72. Like 72 millimeters across. This one is maybe 1.5 millimeters. I'm not centimeters, millimeters. 72 millimeters, maybe 1.5 millimeters. Which lens do you think is better? It's that one. Okay? It works. You know, obviously we get pictures with it, but there's not a lot of glass in the lens. So what happens, there are many advantages to a wider lens. One is it captures more light. So even when it's dark, it gets more light. The other thing is just how much glass there is. When there's a lot of glass, any problems with the glass, like any imperfections in how it was manufactured, they all have imperfections. Any imperfections in the glass doesn't mean as much because the piece of glass is bigger. But when you have a very small lens, then any imperfections in the glass, whatever, become incredibly important because it's going to be in all your pictures. Right, is it clear? Everyone understanding so far? If you're on an iPhone, and the Android phones should have something similar, you know, maybe displaying in a different manner. At the bottom, you have choices. You see where the red button is? You have choices of what kind of pictures you want to take. You have time lapse, which probably wouldn't ever really use. You have slow motion, which is something to play with, but doesn't have much value. You can shoot video. As I bring it up, you can see it shoot photo. Portrait mode, we'll talk about in a moment. You can shoot squares, because photographs normally come in two types. There's ones that are approximately 3 by 4, the ratio, side versus the length. So they're wider than they are tall. But some cameras, or some old film cameras, came in squares. They shot square pictures. So if you want to do that on the iPhone, you have that option to shoot it. You'd have a panorama, which we talked about before, but on the iPhone you can do it without needing a separate piece of software. The phone will stitch it together automatically. So now I have a wider view and I didn't have to run it through computer software to get it. All right. Hopefully your Android phone is working. You can see it work in a similar manner. If you have, how many of you have the bigger iPhone? Somebody have the bigger iPhone like this one? Okay. The bigger iPhone has actually two features. One is the bigger iPhone has two lenses. A lot of the Androids have that too. They have two lenses. Actually, there's three because there's another one looking this way for selfies. But there's two lenses. I can switch between the lens. That's one lens, and that's the other lens. So if I want to get tighter on something, it's kind of like a zoom lens, but I just have two lenses. I can go tighter or I can go wider. I can also do this, where I've taken one lens and I've zoomed it in so it's the same picture size as the other lens, but we don't want to do that. Yeah, we stopped at the lead. Everyone should know that because they have notes all over the page, but nothing past the word lead. So the lead is the beginning of the story. It tells the essential elements of the story in the shortest number of words. And remember, the purpose of the lead was to tell the reader what the story is about, where they can decide if they're going to read the rest or not. But even if they don't read the rest, they at least know what the general gist of what the story was. Right. So is that clear to everybody? Because if the story doesn't start out right, the whole thing is kind of messed up after that. So it's very important to get a strong start, otherwise nobody wants to read your lead. And you need to write the lead in some way that's compelling, not just something that sounds, like the grass grew at the evangelistic meeting and people were baptized, just something that doesn't mean anything to anybody or something that's not inherently interesting. So in the lead that we were talking about, we were thinking of the lead being something like 10,000 people baptized, in a 10,000 people baptized in a stadium by the Seventh-day Adventist Church. So what got put first? 10,000 was put first because that's the most interesting part of it, right? If it was like two people get baptized in a swimming pool, two's not very interesting. So you have to find what's the most interesting thing. In this case, we have a big number, 10,000, so we want to hit that as the focus because people want to read more. If it's just people were baptized, well, it's not, okay, so what? But 10,000 people baptized, you immediately want to know why, who, what, okay? It's very important. It's very important that your story have firsthand information. Firsthand information is information from the person that saw it. Sometimes that's you, but frequently you're going to rely upon somebody else. So firsthand information, not somebody's brother, sister's, husband's, uncle's, niece who heard about his neighbor who was there, but you want someone who saw it with their own eyes. The Bible confirms this pretty strongly, this principle. What kind of people wrote the New Testament? People who were eyewitnesses and people who were talking to eyewitnesses. Like Luke. Luke doesn't appear to be an eyewitness, but Luke's story is very kind of scientific, the way that it's laid out, and he's talked to people. Apparently in his journeys in the book of Acts, he has talked to people, so he's got eyewitness account. Eyewitnesses report, the car on fire before it hit or something. Okay, that's third person. Even if you saw it yourself, you're going to write it in third person. Eyewitnesses saw, even if you're the eyewitness. But it's always written in third person. Okay, it's never written in first person. I saw this, I did this, or second person, we did this. It's about us. No, it's about them. Active voice. Have you heard of this before? Active voice? There's an active voice and there's a passive voice. Your job as a journalist is to reconcile the accounts accurately. But if some person said it was on fire, another person said it wasn't on fire, you could say, quote somebody that was on fire and then quote somebody that wasn't on fire, because you don't know. Because one says it is and one says it wasn't. You need to try and reconcile the accounts as much as possible without a bias or an opinion. For example, if it was like a baptism, and you talk to the first person, they said 10,000. You talk to another one, they said hundreds. 10,000 is hundreds. It's 100, right? No, it's 1,000 hundred. So that's correct, but you have to reconcile it. So what you'd probably do is go to the person who organized the event and say how many people were baptized. And they would say 10,142. You have to try and reconcile the difference. Well, the police are considered an authoritative source. So if they say there's one, then you probably need to say there's one. If everyone else is telling you there's five, you would say, something like eyewitnesses report 5 deaths, although the police only say 1. So both sides got their say. But if the police are telling you there's only 1, and eyewitnesses are telling you there's 4, there's probably 4, despite what the police are telling them. It's just common sense. But if the police are saying something, you kind of need to tell what the police are saying, but you can say other people are saying something else. Sometimes people it's an advantage to somebody if they're not exactly truthful. And you have to kind of discover that too. I'm not sure that would happen too much in a church story, but you can get something like a traffic accident. Nobody's ever wrong. Who caused the accident? And they all point at each other. You did. No, you did. So nobody's wrong. So it's to the advantage of the one that's guilty to look innocent. Okay, but I don't see that in a church story. Usually, church stories aren't that controversial. Let's talk about active voice versus passive voice. Passive voice is kind of boring to read. Active voice is very dynamic. If you want your writing to have life and to come alive, you would write it in active voice. There are some examples here of active and passive voice. The man is doing the repairs on the engine. It's passive voice. Okay? Let me show you active voice, and we'll see the difference. The man repaired the engine. It's a more active voice than the other one. So, the man is doing the repairs on the engine. There's a couple of things wrong there. One is it's not precise language. You've got a lot of prepositions and the like in there that you don't need. And this phrase is doing, like is going, is passive. Rather than say he's going to the store, it's better to say he walked to the store. Okay? Journalism is usually written in past tense, but you would say, he walked rather than he went. Say, he walked to the store. You'd say, he was in the pool. He was thrown in the pool and was trying to swim. That's kind of passive. Active would be more like thrown into the pool. He tried not to drown. Okay, it's more active. You see the difference? It's much more alive. You use less words, and that it's really the verb that's changing. The verb is changing to something that does something rather than something that is. A big problem with it is has been and will be. It has been decided that there'll be a new law is really passive. What's active would be there will be a new law. Okay? Has been can almost always be done away with. Because it's like saying past twice. So has been needs to get away, need to do with. Whereas like will be, he will be the new president. Yeah, it's passive. Or you'd say he was elected president. So you have a word, you have an active word in there, rather than like a word that doesn't do anything. Okay? If you want to shorten the writing, usually go back and look at the sentences and make sure they're active and not passive. Okay, thing farther down, disappearing from radar at 6:30. It was feared the plane had crashed. Okay, it's very wordy and it's passive. Active tense. Officials feared the plane had crashed after disappearing from radar at 6:30. And the second one actually is a little longer than the first one, but the second one is a lot more pleasant to read. It's also more interesting to read. Is this making sense? Yeah. Active and passive? Yeah. Okay. Remember, I don't know if you did this in college, but in a writing class and stuff, trying to make everything active and not passive. Let's go on to the next thing, the non-judgmental observer. As a journalist, you're the observer of no opinion. Okay, you're just an observer, which can be hard to do if you actually have an opinion, because you need to try and get rid of your opinion. This is for news. When we talk about public relations, it's going to be different. But with news, you don't have an opinion one way or the other. You're not going to build your opinion into the story. Like officials feared the plane had crashed after disappearing from radar. If you had an opinion that the airline was at fault, or that you don't like that airline, that would be a bias. If you feel the airline was at fault, officials feared the airline had crashed the plane after disappearing from radar. So, you just kind of work it in because that's the way you see it, but you have to work that stuff back out because you don't want to hurt your credibility by making people think you have an opinion. You do have an opinion, but you're going to leave it out. Part of the problem right now, in my strong opinion, about modern journalism, particularly stuff on television, is that it's presented now with an opinion on purpose. So if they like this person, they do good stories. If they like that person, or if they don't like that person, then they only do bad stories. In the U.S., we have that pretty strongly with politics. If they like this person, they'll only do good stories. If they don't like that person, they'll only do bad stories. That's kind of problematic. If it's an opinion piece and you're writing from your opinion, sure. But if you're trying to be like just the facts, then you have to work your opinion out of it. It can be very hard to do when you have a very strong opinion. Non-judgmental observer, disinterested third party. It's as if you were you're just standing on a hill and observing and writing down what you see and what you're hearing. Most of this, which works for written language, also works for video. Kind of the same ideas, but there's a huge difference between the two and how they're written. Video is written in conversational style. Video is written in the way that people talk, where obviously something that's written is written the way that people write. There's two languages. There's a written language and there's a spoken language, and they're not the same. They use the same words, but they're not the same. For example, if you were to write, if you're writing something and one person passes another, and you would say, he passed the gentleman saying how are you? Or how do you do? Or how are you doing? Conversationally, we don't really usually say it. We're not going to say it that way. One, we're probably going to say something like, I don't know, how are you doing? It only becomes, how you do? What's up? Hey, what's up? You can't write that. That's not the written language, that's the verbal language. Video is written for the verbal language, the way you say it. Consequently, video doesn't have to be complete sentences, and it doesn't have to have perfect grammar, because we don't talk that way. Okay? If you write video as if it were written language, it sounds stiff and it sounds like you're reading a book rather than relating something. Is that clear? Yeah. Sometimes it's helpful if you're writing for video just to say out loud, just to say what you want to. You have to write it because it's a story. You have to write it, even though it's going to end up on a video. Someone's going to have to read it, but it can be helpful to talk out what you're going to say, because then you will say it in a conversational style and not in the written style. A lot of stuff that you see, like news reports, they don't seem like they're very good. You ever watched it and it just seems sort of amateurish? Usually, what I've noticed is because they're writing it as if it were the written language. They're not writing in a conversational style. When I worked in news, the two news readers made more money than anybody else in the station. The reason that they made more money was because they represent the station. They're the face of the station on the air. But also because they get on the air and they have to be normal, likable people. And it's very hard to be a normal, come across as a normal person and be on TV. The basic difference is the conversational style. If you notice good news readers, even though they're reading very well-written copy, they do it in a manner that's like a person. They're personable. And that's not easy to do. It takes effort and it takes skill. So when you see somebody reading the news, it looks like it's very easy. They're just reading what somebody's putting on a teleprompter, but actually it's not. And it's taken a lot of skill and work for them to get to that level. So the more conversational you can be, the better it is, because in the visual world that video is, people want to be spoken to as a person. When you're writing something in a newspaper, it's different. You can write to them, it can be more formal. In fact, it should be more formal. Is this making sense? Yeah. Write it the way you'd say it. And grammar is, in a conversation style, grammar and things like complete sentences aren't as important as they are in written language. We talked about this on Jesus' methods. Actually, Jesus is in all of these methods. We said this directly before. That's be direct. Say what you mean in a straightforward, direct way. Don't go somewhere else to say it. Don't say it more words than it takes to say it. You want to be direct. You guys writing this down? I intentionally didn't put the definitions on there, so you'd write, what the definitions are. Be direct. A lot of writing, quite honestly, is just editing it to be more straightforward. Writing it out, then going through it and editing it, making it shorter and shorter so you're talking in a more direct manner. And also in a simple manner. Not using words that people don't know. It's somewhat bothersome when you read something, there's a word you don't know. You have to go figure out what the word means. People want to know what the news is. They want to know what your story is. They don't care how smart you think you are by using big and obscure words. Okay, the next thing, avoid jargon. What's jargon? What's that?
Like informal form
Terms.
terms.
Communication.
Yeah, it's basically professional slang words. We have a lot of them in the Adventist church. We have a lot of jargon in the Adventist church, like GC. Right? If you write to the church member and write GC, they know exactly what you mean. You write to somebody else who's not in the church, say GC, they have no idea what you're talking about. You can even write it out. General conference. Write that to the non-church member. They don't know what you're talking about. Must be lots of people talking together because it's a general conference. They don't know what that is. A lot of our bookstores are called ABCs, Adventist Bookstore. So, hey, I went to the ABC next to the GC, and it's like, what's an ABC? Is that a place where little kids go to school? They don't know what it is. So you have to explain what it is. You can say Adventist Bookstore and they'll understand. Christian bookstore may be even better. When it comes to General Conference, even if you write it out, General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists, they still don't know what it is. So you would change General Conference by calling it the world headquarters of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And you can say also known as the General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists. Then after that, you can write General Conference because you've explained what it is. But we use a lot of jargon. Spirit of prophecy means we're talking about Ellen White. My favorite writer means you're talking about Ellen White. What are some others? There's a whole bunch of them. Think of some jargon words the Adventists use all the time. Happy Sabbath. AY. Yeah. Maranatha. Yeah, there's a bunch of them. Investigative judgment. That means nothing. Nothing to anybody else. In fact, a lot of Adventists don't know what investigative judgment means. But avoid the jargon, right? If you're writing a piece for the church, then they know, what these words are. In that sense, it's not really jargon. It's just regular speech. But if you write it to outside the church, they don't know what you're talking about, right? Potluck. Do you have haystacks here? Do you have that? There's something that almost every Adventist church has on Sabbath. It's a meal called haystacks. It has like corn chips, they're kind of like potato chips, but they're crisps that are made out of corn. And then it has like lettuce, and it has sometimes rice, and maybe some Mexican-style salsa on the top, maybe some whipped cream or something, sour cream, or whatever. It's very common in the U.S. because a bunch of vegetarians that eat all sorts of different things, that's like the one thing everybody will eat. So if you do that, you're pretty sure everyone will eat it. We call it, the Adventists call it haystacks. I don't know why. The rest of the world calls that a taco salad. A taco is a Mexican food that's also made out of corn that's crunchy. So sometimes there's alternate words that don't need description. We just call it by what everybody else calls it, and they figure out what we're talking about. Okay, when we're doing video, this is extremely important. We write to the video. That means we know what video we have, what our pictures are, and we make sure that we write according to what we have for pictures. So if you have 10,000 people that were baptized, and 500 of them were wearing all red, so you go 10,000 people were baptized and 500 were wearing, all red baptismal gowns. But you don't have any pictures of any people wearing red baptismal gowns. So what are you going to show? You don't have anything to show. So maybe you wouldn't mention that they had red gowns. And maybe you would make sure you were more attentive next time and got pictures of people with red gowns. But if you can't show it, it's best not to mention it. Okay? If it's like 10,000 baptisms and you didn't get any baptism pictures, you're going to be in a lot of hurt because the story is baptism. Without baptism pictures, you really don't have a story. You don't have a video story. So you have to write to what you have. And if you don't have it, and it's important, then you better remember that so the next time you don't get in that situation again. So they're talking about baptism. You say 10,000 people were baptized in a stadium. The first shot you probably want to show would be a big stadium where you can see maybe people being baptized. The next shot would be a close shot of people being baptized. And then it says, then you go into the next sentence and say something like, baptism is an important event in the life of a Seventh-day Adventist. You could show a few more baptisms. Maybe you could show the sign in front of the stadium that says Seventh-day Adventist, something like that. But what you write to the pictures. Some people complain that radio people say this, that television is just radio with pictures, and they're right. It is radio with pictures. But the pictures are very important because the pictures add emphasis to the words. And if the picture is showing one thing and the words are saying something else, not only are they not helping each other, but they're fighting each other because it's becoming confusing. 500 people had red gowns and were baptized. So then, wow, 500 people had red gowns. You really want to see that, but you weren't shown it. It's like you're disappointed. Like, wish they hadn't even brought it up because I never saw it. So you have to write to the video, and the expression that's commonly used in the industry is see dog, say dog. So if the video is showing a dog, you talk about the dog, okay? That's basically what it means. If you're talking about a dog, you show a dog. Talking about baptisms, you show baptisms. If you want to show something unique and add detail, you need to have pictures of the thing that's unique and detailed. You're not going to be 100% sure what the story is when you do it. You're going to be pretty sure, but you're not going to be 100% sure. So when you shoot something with video, a news story, you need to take pictures, a lot more pictures than you think you're going to use, a lot more video than you think you'll use, of a wide variety of things. Because you may get back and decide, I really want to mention those 500 people in red baptismal gowns. And if you shot a lot of video, chances are you have some of those people in red gowns. But if you got out there and said, hey, it's a 2-minute story, so I'm going to shoot 2 minutes of video, you're probably not going to have a whole lot of stuff that you wish you had when you went to edit it together. And the problem with video is you can't recreate it. You can't go back out there and call 100,000 people back to the stadium and everybody back to be baptized because you didn't get a shot. With the print, when you're writing print stories, you can call somebody on the phone, call an eyewitness, and talk to them on the phone. It's like, I'm missing details about the 500 thing, and I'll have anybody here talking about the 500 red baptismal robe people. So you pick up the phone, maybe call one of them or call the leader of the group, and you can get the details from them and quote them. You can't do that with video. It's gone. The event's over. So you really have to be careful with what you take pictures of, and the way to cover it, to be careful to make sure you always have everything, is to shoot a lot of stuff. If it's a 2-minute story, it would not be unusual to come back with more than 30 minutes of video. Okay? Especially if somebody's talking, because if somebody gives a speech, normally you're going to record the whole speech because you don't know what part you want to use yet. You haven't heard it spoken. Okay, this is important in journalism, is let them say it, let the eyewitness say it. So if you have facts, 10,000 people were baptized, it's good to follow that up with someone who can give you a quote that says 10,000 people were baptized. It's an eyewitness account, and it's a third-party credit. So say 10,000 people were baptized in a stadium in Ghana, and you have a soundbite and saying, I was surprised that so many people would get baptized at one time. I mean, 10,000 is a big number. So now you've gotten them to verify your fact. Particularly all the facts are in the lead, it's really good to have somebody else say it. You're going to say it in the lead, but then farther down, you're going to have somebody say everything that you said in the lead.